Hello and welcome to Global Beehive Talk, today with Johan Magnusson. He is the head of division at Information System at Gothenburg University and also the Director of Swedish Center of Digital Innovation. Thank you, Johan, for joining us and participating in this talk.
No worries, my pleasure.
Can you tell us a little bit about yourself and about your work in these two departments or areas?
Yeah, sure. So I'm childishly interested in digitalization, and I've been doing research related to that for quite some time now. I started out within management accounting, looking into how IT governance is basically changing or not changing over time. And that led me further on into more IS-related studies, information system studies, because what we were seeing was an increased pervasiveness of digitalization. It became more and more a method for business development, and that was no longer sort of restricted to the IT governance of the organization. So it sort of seeped out into the rest of the organization. So I followed it. So that's why I moved from the business school here in Gothenburg to the Department of Applied IT, where I am right now. And the Swedish Center for Digital Innovation, that initiative is something that we started already back in 2013 as a response to, well, the increased necessity to look into how digital technologies were starting to seep into business models, processes, products, services, platforms, etc. So there we pooled our resources with the Stockholm School of Economics and Umeå University in order to get sort of a critical mass of really top-notch researchers. So around 45 people looking directly into this in both the public and the private sectors.
It sounds really, really interesting and something we should talk more about in this talk. But if we go back a little bit, around 20 years, I mean, what do you think has happened in looking at digitalization, both in society and business, both and also in private and public sector?
Yeah, well, I mean, before 2010, we had computerization, we had digitization, we were turning analog assets into digital assets, so sort of porting them over, right? So we were building large-scale capabilities that we were unaware of. So the generative aspects of this were not visible yet. But starting from 2010, when we saw the influx of new business models like Facebook, like the large-scale effects of what Google was doing, Amazon later, etc., Airbnb, then something fundamentally changed. There we saw a shift from digitization to digitalization. We started using digital and digital materiality as some sort of a secret ingredient to business development. So when we look at this, we see a shift in terms of, well, from the beginning, we only saw IT as a cost. And the only way that we used it was to decrease cost in business. We automated, right? We put in algorithms to replace human hands. We strived for greater and greater economies of scale. So all of these systems that we put in place back then, they were designed for automation. But starting from 2010, we saw an increased utilization of digital innovation, where the digital was actually something that allowed us to gain new options, that allowed us to recombine certain things in our business into new products, new services, shifting over from, let's take Volvo as an example, of Volvo Cars, shifting over from delivering a car, a product, into delivering a service platform. So something that is reprogrammable, that is possible to add new services on top of it as it lives on, right? So that shift around 2010 is what we see as digitalization. Then we can start talking about digitalization. And starting from the Davos meeting in 2015 in January, then it becomes sort of hyperbole. Then everybody started talking about this. It becomes something that everybody needs to relate to. It becomes a central piece in order for you to stay legitimate. So everybody starts following the leader. Everybody starts looking at these weird forerunners. Everybody starts getting on the bandwagon, if you will. And that is a super interesting phenomena to study. So we need to be very careful here, because we can talk about digitalization on the societal level, and there we don't really know. We have no idea what the implications are on privacy, on sort of democracy, on there's a lot of fog there. But if you turn that down or look at it from the organizational perspective, then we can actually say something about it. We know what is needed in order to make sure that we have the capabilities necessary to reap the benefits of digitalization. And it becomes this trade-off between automation, i.e. making everything repetitive, making it less inclined to be able to be dynamic and agile and change over time. So the more we automate, the more rigid we become. On the other side, you've got the innovation, right? With the variety, the economies of scope rather than scale. So how do we balance this? That has become the core issue that we are trying to address in our research.
It sounds really interesting. Something you mentioned there is the new types of business model that are popping up with Airbnb and Uber and all of these famous cases. How has that affected, would you say, the public sector, and what kind of services they provide to their citizens?
What we know from digitalization is that the more digitally intense an industry or a sector is, the more fluctuations you see in demand, right? So the more dynamism you see in the environment. So if you look at the public sector, for instance, I mean, when you interact with the public sector and you're used to one-click shopping through Klarna or through Amazon or whatever, right? You expect the same level of service, right? You expect that, right? And then that sort of meets a bureaucracy built to built and improved continually over time to do exactly the same thing as it did in 1980, right? So it becomes a clash. And there you have the largest problem right now is this loss of relevance by the public sector or in the public sector. So if the public sector cannot meet the new demands, if they cannot listen to the users, then they will fall behind. And we as citizens will choose different vendors. You see that very clearly in the Kry case in Sweden. Right. So this is something that costs around 60 million Swedish crowns to develop and take to market. Right. 60 million is nothing for the public healthcare system. That's like coffee money, but they didn't do it. Right. So they waited. And what's the monthly cost in lost revenue and lost relevance for the public healthcare system right now from Klarna or from Kry? Right? So there is just doing these continuous improvements, continuing to double down on your initial investment of what is expected of you as a public sector actor is a really bad idea, because the only capital you have in the public sector is your relevance to the citizens and to the corporations that you serve.
That's interesting. But if you would look at the general state of maturity in the public sector or in the private sector as well, what do you think, what is that maturity level, looking at it from maybe an international perspective?
Well, I mean, we measure this, right? So there are a lot of different measures flying around from the UN, from the EU, etc., and they're all built on output metrics, right? So you look at the number of kilometers of fiber optic cable that you have sort of dug down. Those are idiotic measures. They don't really tell you anything. You count the number of agencies that have a web page. I mean, that hasn't been a relevant metric for Sweden since the 1990s, right? Yeah. So those measures are not relevant, I would say. They are simply output metrics, and they're antiquated because they have to cater to a very diverse group of countries, right? Where you have different prerequisites in place. So what we do is we measure this in terms of the necessary prerequisites to utilize the benefits of digitalization, i.e. the government's high aim of becoming the best in the world. And when we measure that, I think that the current level is around 47% of optima in Sweden, right? And it's roughly the same within the industry. Right. So there's no fundamental difference between the prerequisites in the industry versus in the public sector, in the private versus public sector in Sweden. If we compare this to an international standpoint, we don't have those metrics. But if we look at Sweden from a historic perspective, we have been strong in terms of digital competence. We have a tendency to use these systems before other countries do. We have invested heavily in digital infrastructure, right? So we had an early mover advantage in this. What we're seeing now is that this first mover advantage or early mover advantage is starting to become a problem for us because we haven't modernized the underlying digital infrastructure. And then I'm not talking about the sort of fiber optic cables and stuff like that. I'm talking about the internal systems of these organizations, which is a mishmash of very old architecturally designed systems. So we have a debt, what we refer to as a digital debt here, that we need to take care of. So from an international perspective, I would say we're top tier, but we will not continue to be if we do not sort of have a turnover of internal systems. And this is something that the National Auditors Association has been or agency has been making us aware of recently. So we need large-scale investments on internal systems, a national digital infrastructure in Sweden, not just in terms of communication of data between the different agencies. That's not a problem. The problem is internal.
But what is the main challenge there? I mean, this must be something that companies or a public organization has seen for years about this digital debt. What is the challenge? Why is it?
We could take this. If we look at the private sector, they do long-term investments in IT, right? The public sector is extremely short-sighted. They only have short-term. Everything is operating expense, basically, right? So they do not do investments in digital infrastructure and underlying systems. They take them as operating expense. And then you have sort of the planning horizon is a year, right? So that has resulted in this short-sightedness has resulted in this. So if you look at the governance models in place, the way that we measure, the way that we price, the way that we control IT in public sector organizations, then that is completely tied down into seeing IT as a business. You've got the supply and demand model in place, and it really breeds short-sightedness. So the short-sightedness is the problem. No ability to cater to the long-term requirements and the long-term functionality of a digital infrastructure.
But how is that supported now? If you see going a little bit into the future, what would you recommend that these companies or organizations do to overcome this digital debt? I mean, how do they actually look a little bit long-term? Who is driving this?
Yeah, if you look at how the private sector is approaching this, then they're taking the investment and they're building parallel infrastructures on the side, because what they have in terms of all the 100x systems that they have in place, they are so old, they need to just go away and die, right? So you just want to get rid of them. But you can't really modernize them, right? So you have to get rid of that house because it's built on a faulty ground, right? Or faulty infrastructure. So you start building something on the side, cloud-based infrastructure, utilizing the modern technologies that we have at our disposal, right? And factoring in that we do not invest in a new technology if it's not future-proof. But if you look at the public sector, then that is so much harder because, I mean, it's 50% of GDP and it's basically a conglomerate, right? But there is no central control. So what they did was they developed, they introduced an agency for digital government, but they didn't give them any mandate or authority. Right? So everybody is just waiting for somebody to sort of take control, but they can't from a constitutional perspective in Sweden. So you have this problem of nobody steering the project, nobody being in control, and that results in them getting assignments related to, well, we could standardize and control what happens between the different agencies and municipalities and regions. Right? But we cannot say anything about what's internally, right? And the internal is 99% of the problem. It's not the interchange between these. It is the internal, right? So they cannot really fix the underlying problem. So what we want to see is the birth of a national digital infrastructure that actually means something, and a gradual shift over into that, a replacement, not to continue to invest on internal systems, but porting over and moving over into utilizing common services from the national digital infrastructure. But that requires a lot of funding, a lot of long-term funding. And the government doesn't really seem interested in providing that funding.
But while waiting for someone on a national level to take an initiative here, what can, for example, a municipality or an agency do today by themselves to actually drive this forward?
Yeah. So there are a number of different things. The first thing is to start talking about the real issues here.
Yeah.
Right. And so we've designed a digital maturity assessment in order to get them to talk about the right issues. And the right issues are issues about control, about funding, about portfolio management, etc. Right? Those are the issues. We should not talk about artificial intelligence and blockchain in the executive team of a municipality or an agency. We should talk about the foundations, the necessary prerequisites to actually get the benefits from digitalization, to stop counteracting digitalization through governance and control. That's the first thing that you should do. The second thing you should do is to get control over your existing digital infrastructure. Very few organizations, both in the public and the private sector, actually have control over their systems. So we did a recent study in one municipality, and it showed that, well, 95% of all systems in the municipality are devoid of a decommission plan. For instance, they just exist. Well, how long have they existed? We don't know. What is the level of user satisfaction in the system? We don't know. What's the level of sort of incidents related to this system? We don't know, right? So we don't have a basis for making decisions in terms of which systems we need to be decommissioned. In Estonia, they've got this rule of thumb that a system cannot exist for more than 5 years because it becomes too expensive, not in terms of maintaining it, but we need to develop on top of it, right? So according to a study in one of the agencies that we looked at, you see that, well, there's a factor of 10 on all new development projects in terms of costs because of the antiquated digital heritage, the antiquated digital debt, the infrastructure, right? So 90% of the development project is basically used to counteract problems with the existing infrastructure, right? We need to take that factor into account. That is the cost of the digital infrastructure, not the maintenance. That's a small portion of it.
What is the problem there? Is it a mindset issue, or is it a leadership issue? What is the...
No, it is a governance and control issue. I mean, if we don't measure it, we don't know, right? And it has been okay not to know. So leadership needs to step in and say that, well, I want a complete plan, a breakdown of which systems we decommission for the next 5 years, right? I want 5 systems per year decommissioned, right? We've got 7 similar finance and control systems in this municipality. Maybe we only need 1, right? Maybe the 290 municipalities should use the same, right? Because it's just a finance and control system, right? The municipalities are under the same legislation. Why not just use the same? Right? They're not special. They're extremely complex, but they're pretty similar.
That's interesting. I mean,
so there is a massive redundancy.
Yeah, I mean, in the end, it's all a matter of understanding what actually creates value and not to your citizens,
Yes.
and where actually to invest and not. If we
Yeah.
try to end this on a little bit positive note, do you have any positive views about the future? About the
Yeah,
visions?
absolutely.
Yeah.
This is basically a gospel about things moving in the right direction. Now we're starting to measure what actually means something.
Mm.
We're starting to understand what we need to control and what we don't need to control, where the cost of control is greater than the benefit. We're seeing a radical shift in the way that we govern IT and organizations. We're seeing a radical shift. And I mean, look at the pandemic. That has resulted in a spur of innovation going on, despite governance counteracting innovation, right? So we circumvented the existing governance and control on account of us having to act swiftly, right? This is fantastic, right? Let's just keep doing that. Let's keep pushing this, and with better basis for making decisions, informed decisions, then we will see the right direction being as we go on. But we need to remember that this is the first time that these types of studies have been done within the public sector, right? So this is the very cutting edge. So Sweden is in a fantastic situation in terms of knowledge and know-how to be able to actually compete in the future. We are on the exact right path right now. Now we just need to scale it.
I mean, that's a fantastic end note here in this global Beehive talk, that the Swedish digital environment is on the right path to greatness. And
Yes.
I want to thank you so much, Johan Magnusson, for sharing your thoughts and research and knowledge in this area. It's been really inspiring to hear your views about the Swedish digitalization and innovation movement.
Yeah, and have a look at our webpage, because we post all the reports that we do, all the white papers, all the scientific publications, and all the lectures that we give on these issues. So just have a look at that.
I will, after this, I will put all these links on this interview so they can have it. Great. Thank you so much, and have a great day.
You too. Bye. Nice talking to you, Hans.
Bye.